There's a dangerous myth out there that I'd like to bust. It started in the marketing world, and I think in due course it will be completely ripped to shreds by the lean startup community. This market positioning myth is that your competition should define your positioning. Now, this is dangerous because it disguises your assumptions about the marketplace early on, and that magnifies your risk because it makes you address uh, those assumptions later on when you could have addressed them early. It also creates myopia towards customer needs because essentially you see customer needs through this lens of what the suppliers and the marketplace are offering, what the competition is offering, rather than looking directly at customer needs. Now, I'm a marketer. I helped set up a digital department of a major agency that was recognized and successful for its ability to use customer information to make very strategic digital campaigns. Um, and in spite of this, I've still fallen prey to this myth. After working at the agency, I set up a business called Hotelecom in Canada, which was a tech supplier for hotels. A few years later, I moved to London, and I considered setting up the same business again. Now, when I looked at the market conditions, I saw the same adoption rates of technology that were in Canada when I had started Hotelecom, and I saw the same competitive landscape. I could almost map the competitors in Canada to ones in the UK, and there was that same lovely gap in the market that we had done so well by in Canada that I thought, well, this is a no-brainer. I'm going to do this in London. Ultimately, I didn't get a lot of calls back uh, from general managers. So when I was going out selling, the callback rate was way lower. And I was scratching my head. I couldn't figure it out. I tried changing benefit statements, tried hiring different salespeople, I tried approaching different types of hotels. Nothing worked. And I was just wondering why was I getting such a lackluster response when the conditions were the same as in Canada. And the market positioning had completely checked out in both cases. What was the problem in the UK? Ultimately, it was because my market positioning was only competitive positioning. It was only looking at the supply of the market and not the demand side of the market. So let's look at this in more detail. There's three major differences. So first, with supply positioning, you're using a competitive analysis to show gaps in supply, but they're not showing you areas of demand that have been unaddressed. This creates a justification approach. So when you see a gap in supply, you now convince yourself that people are going to welcome you when you say, well, I've actually addressed this gap in the market that nobody else has come to address yet. This takes your attention away from going out and getting real facts from real customers. When you go to real customers, you're identifying real opportunities and demand, but when they're telling you about their problems and you're getting consistent feedback about those problems, by the nature of that, you're actually discovering a gap in supply. So you'll arrive at that anyways. But the other very important thing is that you're not convincing yourself of anything. You're asking questions and getting answers out there from your real future customers. The second thing is, and this was the problem that I had with this hotel business, is that when you start with competitive analysis, you actually don't address the viability of marketing channels and getting to market. When you look at that from the supply side approach, you end up looking at things like the size of the market, broad trends, and in the worst case scenario, you end up saying things like, well, the market is so big, so if I only get 0.1% of the market, I'm going to be loaded. Whereas when you take the bottom-up approach, when you start with the demand side, you naturally, after discovering the customer problem and figuring out a solution for it, the natural next step is to then figure out, well, of all the customers I've spoken to so far, how can I get a hold of the next 100 or the next 1,000? This forces you to consider how you're going to make them aware of it, how you're going to connect with them or they're going to connect with you, and how you're going to distribute the product to them. And all of those things come with real costs and real tangible ways of making those connections that you can cost and test out. So that gives you a more realistic channel to market. It also brings out any problems that you might have in terms of your sales process. So in my case, basically my sales roadmap was based on the way general managers work in Canada. And even though the competitive landscape was identical, there's a lot of things that are really different in the UK. Ultimately, there's higher employee turnover here. Suppliers tend to be less reliable in the UK. So most new suppliers approaching hotels get treated with a lot more skepticism. Um, and there's just a set of other problems. There's different ways hotels get rated here. So the hotel manager actually has a whole set of different problems that have nothing to do with technology, but that make it so when a new technology opportunity comes to them, it's not at the top of their list. Whereas in Canada it was. Here it wasn't. So that's just simply why I wasn't getting any calls back. It wasn't a problem that was the most pressing one that a hotel manager needed to solve. Now the last difference is really more long term. Because you describe when you start with supply side positioning, when you start with competitive analysis, you naturally force yourself into this box of dealing with your competition and describing your product in the same terms that they do, using the same vocabulary, even if you don't refer to them directly, or even indirectly, where you'll say, well, it's the cheapest option or the best option. You're still sort of implicitly referring to them. And even if you don't do that, you're still using the same terminology. You're still actually addressing the same problem that they're addressing. Whereas if you actually go look at existing customer problems, you have a lot more freedom. You don't need to allude to your competition at all. You can allude to the customer problem, and you have freedom to evolve around what the customer needs without having to worry about what the competition is doing. So sorry, it's been a bit of a long post, but I hope this was helpful. I do think that if you're starting a business, you should really be looking at customer demand side of the market for your market positioning, not the supply side.